Why won't my thing download all of a sudden? Yeah. All right, 1 second and I'll be there, Jeff. Sorry, I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next regular meeting of the Board of Education is still currently scheduled for July 23rd, 2019. At 7:30 in this meeting room. I will be reaching out to you all. We did not get quorum for the change I suggested. So I will reach out to you for a few more dates, and if not, it will stay on the 23rd. But the public should be aware that we are trying to move that date. I will reach out to you as best we can should it move. But at the moment, the next meeting is July 23rd, 2019, 7:30 p.m. in the Board of Education meeting room. With that, I will have a quick chair report this evening, mostly just to extend our congratulations to the class of 2019. It was a lovely ceremony, so thank you to the high school for pulling it together because the weather did not cooperate. However, it really was a joy, and what a nice group of accomplished kids to send off into their futures. So it really was lovely. So Dr. Landon, please extend our congratulations again to Mrs. Dunn for the class of 2019. With that, we'll move on to public comment. Seeing none, we'll move on to the superintendent's report.
The school year ended on a positive note, and a lot of things are in the works for things to begin July 1st. So I think we can look forward to a good school year next year.
And it should be noted that this is Dr. Landon's final meeting with us, and so as we have said many times, we thank him for his service and for owning this district like he had owned his districts before him as a full-time superintendent.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve. This has been one heck of a great year, so I'm very happy.
You might miss us. With that, we will move on to the approval of minutes. It is requested that the board approve the following minutes. Minutes of the special meeting and executive session held on June 11th. Mrs. Ritchie so moves, Mr. Deneen seconds. All in favor? That is unanimous with one abstention. Oh, Mr. Burke, you weren't there. There were two abstentions. Mr. Burke and Mr. Maroney abstaining. And then minutes of the regular meeting held on June 11th, 2019. Mrs. Ritchie and Mrs. McNamara, all in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. We will move on to board committee reports. Anybody?
I'll give a quick update.
Sure, Mr. Deneen.
Quick update from the Oxbridge Building Committee. The members of the Thank you. Members of the Oxbridge Building Committee met with the State Construction Grant Authority last Wednesday, June 19th. It was a positive meeting. We are scheduled to submit the application for the construction grant tomorrow. And the feedback from the state was very positive in terms of how we're organized, what we're doing. So we continue to move forward on that.
Thank you. Any other board committee reports? We will move on to presentations and discussions. With that, I have an amendment to the agenda. I would like to make a motion to include action item F, board discussion and possible action on the recommendations to modify the Oxbridge educational specs as recommended by the town building committee. Mrs. Ritchie, can I have a second? Mrs. McNamara, all in favor? Thank you very much. That will be item F, and we will roll right into the presentation and discussion on the annual progress report for the 2018-19 district goals and objectives. Dr. Landon. Oh, did I skip? Sorry. Yeah. High school graduation gatehouse, the proposal and recommendation. Sorry. I wanted to skip it.
We had anticipated that Tig and Bond would be here, and I know we have loaded up. Can you do that, Susan? Load up the plan? And for all I know, they may be on their way, so, but I will, I've been working very close, Mike and I, Mike Lynch, members of the police department, we have Planning and Zoning Commission, all have been working on this project essentially since the beginning of the year. Our first concern, of course, was the all-hazard school security and safety plan, and within that, it was felt very strongly that we had to monitor access to the Darien High School property. Once the kids were in school, that the property we had to find a way in which to be able to determine and control who can come in when they come in. We looked at the concept of a gatehouse. We liked that. We thought that was a great idea because we did not know whether or not we could close off Norotan and Nutmeg. So when I came to the board in February, the proposal was just for the gatehouse at an estimated cost of $150,000. From that point on, we began to do some of the other work to determine whether there were other options available to us. Mike, our Mike, had a title search done. We had traffic studies done, and we met periodically with the police department, and we determined that it was possible to shut down, we had the right to shut down access from Nutmeg and access from Norotan. So we then met with the architects and planners at Tig and Bond and said, come up a plan that would enable us to do that so that we can have as secure a plant as possible at Darien High School while students were in session. In other words, when school opens up, parents can drop their kids off, buses can come in, drop the kids off. Once the school day starts, the campus is closed except as people are identified and permitted in. To do that, I'm not sure everybody can see this, but there would be, of course, a gatehouse. And as originally planned, that would have one of our security people in that gatehouse controlling entry into the building, onto the campus. The issues were, how do you get people who don't belong there to turn around and leave? And so a landscape plan was designed that enables, if you look, I don't have a point, but let's see. Find the gatehouse. Okay, as you can see down there, there is the gatehouse.
I'm sorry, where?
Mike?
Yep.
Mike, you want to move the cursor?
Yeah, it's the next slide. I'm sorry. Yes, here it is. So, what you would have, of course, here's the gate and the gatehouse. Somebody comes in, if they're not permissible, they come around and they're out on High School Lane. So there's no problem about diverting traffic. It does not interfere with the proposed cross-county trail because the cross-country trail will be unaffected by this. So that's point one. We then go on to point two, and that's the. Where do we have that one? This is this we saw. Which is which? Was this? That's the same.
That's New Road.
That's So, on the road at Nutmeg, we will have gates. And there will be a screening device where anybody who wants to come in, who has proper business, onto the campus with proper identification, can provide their identification remotely to the person in the guardhouse, and then the gate will be lifted, and the person can come around and find parking. On the other hand, if a person is not identified and doesn't belong there, or it could be a delivery truck, they would be diverted around to the main gate where there would be further examination of credentials and the determination as whether the person belongs in. So as a result of that, the same holds true at Norotan. It's a high-tech way of ensuring that our kids are safe and ensuring that people who have no proper business on the high school campus can be diverted from being on the campus. It provides for turnarounds and the like, so that whether you come in from the Norotan or you come in and you're not permitted to come through, or on Nutmeg, or as I showed from the gatehouse, there are turnarounds that are spacious and allow people to, or vehicles to move out. The estimated cost of this project is site and roadway construction, which is estimated to be between $370,000 and $400,000. Architectural fees to be $40,000 to $50,000. The high-tech security system, $200,000 and $250,000, and the design and receiving permits somewhere in the neighborhood of $90,000 to $100,000. So the cost could be anywhere from $700,000 to $800,000. We assume it'd be a major capital project. Originally, this was a priority 1. The board made it a priority 2 last year because we hadn't had fully developed plans. It's my recommendation that, consistent with our efforts to have security at the high school, we do have an SRO there, that this would be one of the best ways to ensure that unauthorized visitors do not come onto that campus. Obviously, I leave it to the finance bodies to determine how it would be funded. I assume it would be bonding. It's a very great climate right now for bonding, but that's not my decision to make.
Board comments and questions.
Do you know if
Mrs. Ritchie.
those turnarounds are, because I recall you mentioned something about if they come in on Norotan or Nutmeg and it's a delivery, they might be diverted to high school. So are those turnarounds large enough for a truck
Yes.
to turn around?
It was deliberately designed to allow for trucks coming in on the wrong entrance to be able to turn around.
Mr. Brown.
So just a couple questions looking at this. So vehicles coming in, are there going to be signage? Are we going to be providing that with the police department or transportation, say basically dead end except school business? Or are we going to have trucks turning around all day long on the road and some of the other dead ends? Or are we going to have ways trying to drive people through here and get turned around nonstop and create more traffic? Is that
I don't think that'll be the case, because I think the directions to any delivery company, we have regulars who come in. You'd have U.S. Mail, you have FedEx, you have all the other delivery companies coming in. They would be instructed to come in through High School Lane.
But do we consider that as part of the evaluation?
The
Traffic patterns, was that part of the pattern? Or
Yes, we did it through traffic
So
study.
the streets around, not just at the gates?
Correct. Yes, we did.
Okay.
That was part of the traffic study that Ty and Bond had performed.
Okay, thank you. And the other question, and again, this may have been a little before my time, but why only the high school? Why aren't we looking at this broader for other schools?
The high school has the greatest traffic and the most numbers of people from different areas to trying to get in. It's more of a community facility. It's large. There are a lot of kids there. It's a place that requires maximum security. And as I understand it, we're already on the path to have an SRO at Middlesex.
Right.
So, I don't think you can do everything at once, but the highest priority is the high school right now.
Mrs. Ritchie.
With the gates, is the thought that during pickup and drop-off times, the gates would obviously be open so the traffic could flow freely into the campus?
Drop off and pick up, yes, the gates will be open. The end of school, the gates are open on all three places.
And how about on the weekend?
Weekends, they would be up. And as we said to all of the youth groups, you know, if they want security, whether for parking or for security, it's their responsibility to arrange for that, either with the police department or through some other means.
Mrs. McNamara.
I'm sorry to clarify, so the gates will be up over the weekends?
They will be.
Okay, and what, I'm sorry,
Ec-
why would
I-
that be if school's not in session?
Because we won't have students, we don't have 1,800 or 1,400 students inside the building where they could be easy targets.
Further board
The
questions?
only other gate we have is going to be the gate on the running path, and that will be open on weekends, except when there are meets or other events that require that gate to be closed. But when school is in session, the gate on separating Dilla from the high school property will be closed during the school day.
Mr. Burke.
I apologize because we may have seen it, but I don't recall seeing the traffic study. Have we seen that yet?
We did not share the traffic study, I do not believe, with the board. It was incorporated with Tig and Bond, and they incorporated that into their study of how best to manage traffic on the site.
You know, I think personally, before I were to cast a vote on this, I think I would like to see the raw data and the actual study.
Mr. Deneen.
So with that question, would it be fair to say, I think we should see the data, but the Ty and Bond traffic study determined that this is the best route, these are the best points to have a gate, to have a guardhouse. That's what the traffic study concluded.
Yes.
But not only Tig and Bond, also our Darien Police Department.
And the police department.
They reviewed the study.
Is there any preliminary work done as to these cut-ins and turnarounds and how they affect our property lines and wetlands? And are they actually feasible the way they're shown on these pictures?
So yes, they are feasible on the way that they're shown on these pictures. In particular, the biggest concern is on High School Lane.
Right.
That's
That's a
cutting through
culvert
hard.
there.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, I'm a little, you mentioned there was going to be high-tech gates, but you also mentioned that they're going to be manned. So we're going to have 3 full-time employees
No,
at
no,
3
no, no,
gates?
I'm sorry.
That's right, okay. That's what I'm
Yeah,
asking, but you
it-
said there's going to be a man at those gates as
No,
well.
it's-
So it's
it's-
just security, it's just.
Just the High School Lane gatehouse will have a person situated in the gatehouse controlling that. That person, through the high-tech, will be able to visualize who is approaching Norotan and Nutmeg and can make a determination based on the reason for the person being there and their identification as to whether to remotely raise the gate to allow that traffic in. It's no different than what we do in this building, for example. When someone comes to this building, they press a button in the back, let's say. The person at the front desk asks them, we have the capability of asking who it is to show identification. Once they do that, only then are they buzzed in. No
So-
different than that.
You're not recommending an additional FTE to man this gatehouse, or you can do this
No,
with
we're going to
current
do it with
staffing?
it, just as we said in February, we'll do it with existing security.
So what impact then would that have on the campus if you're removing a monitor?
It wouldn't. So we have 6 campus monitors currently, and they're currently outside directing traffic. So we're really just redeploying them into a central location where they would be able to manage the parking a little bit better.
Mrs. Stein.
Did the traffic study look specifically at drop-off and pickup times? Because parents line up fairly early. It's not, I just want to make sure if we're going to go ahead and do something like this, we have an accurate understanding of when it gets really crowded on those entrances and egresses at pickup and drop off, because it's not just 20 minutes before, drop off and pick up.
So the traffic study did pick various dates and times. They set it down, I believe, over a 3-week process period where school, and they monitored the AM as well as in the afternoon as well as in the PM routes. They do have that data. That data was presented to us. So we
And did
can
those
easily-
times incorporate drop-off and pickup?
Yes, it did. Yes.
Okay. And are those, is anything we're doing here require additional easements, approvals from P and Z? They would?
Yes.
Okay, so P and Z would also be able to look at that traffic study and make a determination if they feel like it's sufficient?
Yes.
Correct.
Correct. We understood that we couldn't go forward without having this approved by Planning and Zoning Commission. And that's why we were happy to have Tig and Bond work with us, because they have familiarity with all of the zoning regulations and requirements, because they've worked so closely with Planning and Zoning here in Darien over the years.
Okay.
Yes, so there would
Mrs.
be many groups. There would be inlands, wetlands, planning and zoning. It would also be the Architectural Review Committee would also have to look at the gatehouse as well.
EPC?
Yes.
Okay, Mrs. McCammon.
So if the gates are open at pickup and drop off, could you spend a little more time talking about what we're really solving for? What is the threat that we're potentially getting rid of?
Well, you could take a look at what we've done inside the schools, like Middlesex Man Trap, or the way we secure the interior of that building so no one can get in during the regular school day. We have no way to prevent people from coming on campus at this point in time while school is in session, and our most vulnerable assets are all collected in one spot. We have no way to keep people out.
So can I recommend at this time that this conversation, we move and have an executive session with the police and administration to maybe fully understand, because I think Mrs. McCammon's question is valid, but part of that, I think, is an executive session question. We're happy to answer your next question, but I think part of that is an executive session and is probably best answered there. Mr. Brown.
I just want to know if we should perhaps entertain a motion to send down to the building committee perhaps to evaluate some of the other schools. I mean, Dr. Lane made a point, we can't do everything at once. So I certainly don't want to do anything to slow this project down, but I know we had some feelings from some of the Board of Finance that we have capacity to do some more things, and maybe we should evaluate that. So I'd like to, at the same time, look at maybe a broader solution to all of the campuses instead of just high school. I think that'd be a good use of our time.
Mrs. Ritchie.
My question is, don't we typically make a decision on the priority 1 projects in the fall? So we wouldn't be looking to make a decision tonight as to whether
No,
or
it's
not
not
this-
on for action this evening.
Okay, because the wording made it seem like maybe we would be voting tonight. So I just want to be
Yeah, it's
clear
not
that
on for action.
I would like to see more detailed information from the traffic study and the, that we don't have before us tonight, and maybe hear from them on that before we make a decision as to whether or not we want to put this into a priority 1.
Okay. Mrs. McNamara?
I would agree. I'd like to see the traffic study. I think that's important for us to move this truly forward. I'd also echo the comments. I'd like to see this as part of a bigger plan for security at Middlesex, for example, where we, again, have everybody from 6th to 8th grade in one building. I think we could argue the threat would be just as real there as it would be at the high school. But more specific question, we are referring to the terms opening, closing. Do we have specific times that you're looking at, or how are you kind of getting over to Katie's point? What times are we actually looking at, or has that been determined?
At the time school opens,
But,
the-
I'm sorry, could we give it a time? What time would this be manned?
it would be manned from the moment the place is closed down until the end of the day when the gate is open.
So once school begins, so I think we need further information.
Okay, I just feel it's still getting to the point there, people are lining up earlier, or coming in late. I'd like to
Well-
better understand the timing of it. Okay, to be continued.
Mrs. McCammon?
Similar to the rest of the conversation, to be had later. I'd like to understand how we would prioritize this and how the police department would prioritize this versus like the portables. I consider the portables to also be a major security risk, and given the level of expense that this entails, I'd like to understand how they would prioritize it and have a conversation at the board level about that.
So I think
totally
that's
agree.
probably why we best have a conversation in executive session, because I think it's dangerous as individuals to prioritize. We should probably hear from the security experts and then match that up with the educational experts rather than individually prioritizing. So I think the conversation's best laid there. If there's additional information you'd like for that conversation, why don't you email it in? And I will make sure that we can have a robust conversation both with administration and with the chief. Sound good?
Great.
Okay, perfect. We will move forward. And because my computer keeps crashing, Mrs. Stein's gonna help me. Oh, geez. We'll move on to further discussion and possible action on the proposed athletic field trips for 2019 and 2020. Dr. Landon and Mr. Manfredonia.
I'll let Mr. Manfredonia talk about the field trips, but the board asked us for some very specific guidelines. And we've put together what I think are really good guidelines for overnight athletic field trips, and that is parents will pay for all overnight athletic field trips, and the cost to parents will include hotels, food, hotels for chaperones, hotel security, and transportation. The hotel rooms will be booked at most at double occupancy for athletes and single occupancy for coaches. For invitational tournaments, a coach and at least one parent must accompany the team, and the Board of Ed, as has been our practice, will pay all entry fees. And I think that'll be addressed equally to every single team that engages in any kind of athletic overnight field trip.
Mr. Manfredonia.
So Dr. Lennon stole my thunder, but we did conversation last week and agreed upon these guidelines. I think they're fair. I think they're consistent with what is done with other overnight field trips that are not athletic driven in the district. So it is our recommendation that the parents fund the cost of the hotels, the food, security, the transportation, with the guidelines of double occupancy for students, single for the coaches, and having at least a coach and at least one parent chaperoning on overnight trips. And the board would continue its practice of paying the entry fees, which are minimal with many of these events. As many events are actually not overnight trips, then the board has always paid those entry fees as well. So.
With that, are there board questions on the field trips as described in your packet? Mr. Burke.
Quick question, I may have missed this. For athletes whose parents may not have the ability to fund the trips, but they're on teams that might otherwise, cut, not individual. What I'd like to avoid is a situation where we look at kids as athletes who have resources so they can pay to go to these events, as opposed to kids who might otherwise, by their athletic skill, merit being on the team. So will there be some sort of...
Sure, there will be certainly a process for requesting those to be paid for by other sources if parents can't afford.
Okay.
Mrs. McMurray, is here yet?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I'm going to pick up on that question. What is the process for those students who feel that they couldn't absorb?
Yeah, they fill up a scholarship request form. It's reviewed by myself, the principal, director of finance. We look at information as much as provided that looks at what the situation is, and then we make a determination from there based on information provided.
And what is the criteria for that?
For scholarship, I think Mr. Fink can correct me, but I think we said free and reduced is it 0 to 10% of the?
I believe it's 0 to 10, and then 10 to 25% for
reduced lunch.
Reduced lunch, correct.
I think also, I may be wrong, but it has always been my experience with overnight athletic activities, invitationals, where kids couldn't afford it. The community always rose to the occasion. And there are many organizations that can assist and have assisted us in the past.
Oh, no, I agree. We have an incredibly generous community. I'm just trying to get a little bit more clarification as to what is the process. So those students who qualify for free and reduced have aid. If a child does not qualify for free and reduced, is there any scholarship afforded to them?
There still would be that opportunity. So that would kick over to the principal, who would review that in conjunction with the school guidance counselors. And they would come back and make the recommendation as to what percentage or what portion should be waived. There are some instances that are very private to the family, and we try to keep that confidentiality.
So, Mr. Feeney, has there ever been an instance for which you were unable to fund a request, an appropriate request?
In the 6 years I have been here, no, there has not.
So I think we do the right thing all the time.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I want to get, that it's not very subjective, left to one person's opinion, as that there are actual guidelines that the principal would follow
Yes.
to do that. Okay, I'm sorry, I have a couple of questions. The coach's hotel and food, et cetera, that's covered by the school? Just to clarify?
The, not paid for,
I'm sorry, it just,
it's like the field trips that we have. Generally speaking, when we have overnight field trips, the money that is collected from the students is used for those particular expenses.
okay,
So it's part of the fee assessed for participating in the field trip?
Correct.
Okay, so hotel for chaperones / coaches.
It says it right here. It says parents will pay for overnight field trips. The cost to be paid by parents will include hotels, food, chaperones, security, transportation.
Okay. Hotels for chaperones, I just wanted to clarify that meant also.
So it should be coaches as well.
At coaches, not the parent chaperone. We have a parent chaperone and we have the coach. Just want to make sure we're talking about both.
So I think we're keeping in practice that as part of the assessed fee, that the coach's fee, much like a teacher who goes on a
Right,
field trip, is
just
assessed as part of the
clarifying
fee.
that we're doing the same thing here.
Any other questions on this? And are there any questions on the particular field trips? Mrs. McNamara?
Still have a question. Then what was your feeling, or how did this impact those sports, or are there sports where the bulk of their activity is done in an overnight setting, or are there? I'm thinking skiing comes to mind. Are there sports in which
Yeah, skiing
you
doesn't
feel
have
that this might become,
No,
swing the
we
pendulum toward the other
look
way?
closely at the existing field trips, which have been, the board has approved for the last several years, and
Okay.
it has no
It
impact
doesn't-
there'll be no impact on the cost of, it'll be a nominal fee that will be assessed to those.
Okay.
All the
Thank
trips
you.
are listed, correct?
no, I'm just thinking of other,
Proposed athletic.
Yeah, skiing has never had a overnight.
independent of
Yeah,
these
skiing's never
trips.
gone
If we're gonna apply these to trips we haven't seen yet, that's why I'm just trying to get at. Okay, so then we're not gonna mess up other sports that we have not yet seen with these guidelines?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Does anyone need to go through the trips individually, or can we take them as a batch? Okay, so,
I have them as a batch.
Mr. Maroney, was that? Okay. May I have a motion to approve the athletic field trips as described in the packet? Mr. Maroney so moves, Mr. Denine seconds, all in favor, and that is unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good luck to the kids, we hope they enjoy. We will move on to the annual progress report on the 2018-19 district goals and objectives. Dr. Landon and team.
As we have in the past, we have sent you these in advance of the meetings, and they have, the staff has worked diligently on updating their achievements. So if you have any questions, please direct them to us, and we'll be happy to do our best to answer them.
Board comments and questions? Seeing none? Anyone need another moment? It was very thorough, thank you. We always look forward to the June, and it's fun to be able to compare it to the fall, so thank you very much. Seeing no board questions, we will move on. Congratulations on all you've achieved this year, and we look forward to developing the new goals and objectives very shortly. We will move on to the annual report on donations. Dr. Landon and Mr. Feeney.
Mr. Feeney.
Okay. So enclosed is a listing of all of our donations that have been received since the beginning of August, leading up to the present day. In total, they total $429,784.
Another very generous year by our community. Board comments or questions? Mrs. Ritchie?
Just for clarification, these are not all things that we have voted on, or are they all things the board has approved?
So we only vote above a certain threshold. So like, for instance, at the
Sorry.
bottom, you see one for $400. That would not come to the board. That could be handled at the building level. Above $1,000, below $1,000, it's at the building level. Above that, it goes to the administration. And above the 5,000,
500 goes to the
500.
superintendent.
500 goes to administration. So some of these smaller ones would not have come to the board table, but the larger ones certainly have, like the Booster
So
Club.
a lot of this is just for informational purposes.
It's, yes, so it usually is a pro forma at the end of the year. Nadine, the superintendent's office, compiles a list of all of the donations that have been received, and we present to the board at the end of the year.
Mrs. McCammon?
Do we usually put the class gifts on here? I know the 5th grade often gives a bench or something like that, and they would all be in the neighborhood of these, $600 gifts. Is there a reason we do or don't capture those?
No, I don't know.
Okay. Perhaps we could going forward.
So class gifts at the end of the
So at the
year.
end of the year, correct.
We don't.
If we could capture them, it makes sense to add that to this list. Any other board comments or questions? Mrs. McNamara?
Picking up on the same idea, I would actually expand it. If there are any gifts from the school PTOs, I know we see the Tokenique, but if there are any playground equipment or any other donations from the PTOs, can we encapsulate that into this report?
Mr. Feeney, would we have? Because we did get the Tokenique gift. If there were, and I know last year that I believe on this list there was a large piece of playground equipment that made this list. So if there were additional PTO gifts, would they be on here?
They should be.
They should be.
They should.
They should.
So if there's one that you don't think is on here,
I know last year we had tightened it up quite a bit for our reporting, and so we expanded this list significantly. If there's something that had slipped through, for example, we can add on the end of the year gifts that some of the schools actually provide. We could add that on as well.
okay. So if we add that on, and then Mrs. McNamara, if you're unaware if something's on here, let us know.
No, I just want to make sure that the generosity of the PTOs are reflected in this report in its entirety. I would defer to our audience members, and clearly the class gifts.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? So again, to our viewing audience, to our administration, and to the public in general, we thank all those who are able to make a gift to help our students in schools. We are incredibly appreciative, and we are very fortunate to have such a supportive community that believes in our kids and our schools. So thank you. We will move on to item E, board action on proposed amendment to section 125 plan. Mr. Feeney.
So we are looking to amend our current existing Section 125 cafeteria plan to include the early retirement incentive plan. As you recall, this will allow certified teachers who took the early retirement incentive plan the option to choose between taxable cash incentive or reducing the incentive on a pre-tax basis for their health insurance. Again, it's an existing plan. It's just allowing them the option prior to the end of the year to have this pre-tax in order to include their health insurance as a component.
Are there any board comments or questions?
It's just something you just thought was, what precipitated having the conversation? Just they asked for it, or?
Correct, yes.
And it's standard in other areas.
Yes, yep. It's a minor adjustment.
It's a minor.
And there's the impact to our finances to make this change?
No, not at all. And it's a one-time change.
So with that, may I have a motion to approve the amendment to the section 125 plan? Mr. Brown so moves, and Mr. Burke seconds. All in favor? Mrs. McNamara, is that a yes?
Yes.
That is unanimous. Katie, we might be hitting yours. Discussion on possible action for the Darien High School shed bonding authorization. I will hand it over to Mr. Maroney, unless you want me to. You go for it.
As we discussed, I think last meeting in our facilities committee, we discussed the I can't, sorry, losing my mind. The high school facility storage facility. High school storage facility, not a shed. It's a storage facility, and the need for the storage. And the current plan is inadequate for what we need, and so I think the thought is that we pull the money, the request, and then we come back to the town for a fuller, more developed plan of exactly what we need and what that would look like.
So what we would do then is send a letter to the Board of Finance, although Mr. Zagrodzky's right here, so at least he'll be aware. We would send a letter to them, and they don't need our authorization to pull that bonding, but I think it'd be in a good form to alert them that we have a new project, and so we could release this authorization, and if the new project was to proceed, we would come forward with that project. So I would just need board action authorizing that letter, but if there's any comments or questions on that. Seeing none? Okay, so may I have a motion to approve notification to the Board of Finance that we are no longer in need of the authorization to build the current project? Sorry, Katie, I'll make that nicer. Mr. Burke and Mr. Maroney, all in favor? That is unanimous. It actually counts. I need like both hands. Okay. I'm just going to give Mrs. Stein a moment to. Okay, so we are going to move on based on our retreat to an outstanding question that was left before the board and that was followed up upon by several board members to make sure it got on here. At the end of our retreat, the question that Tom Mooney put forth that the board needed to decide upon would shall individual members of town boards, commissions, and I would also add legislative bodies because the RTM is not covered by a town board or commission, be given special accommodations and privileges with regard to informational requests different than other residents of Darien, absent a vote by their public agency, which is a long way of wording what we were discussing as one of our scenarios that at our retreat. So I'm going to give you guys the floor on this one. I know people question me to have it on, so feel free. Nobody? Nobody has a feeling everyone wanted it on the agenda.
No, I want, Dr. Landon is the presenter, so I'm curious, what did you want to say?
Oh, well, I guess you folks know I'm pretty much of a strict constructionist when it comes to the statute regarding the powers authority of the Board of Education. I believe strongly that boards of education are agents created by the boards of education, are bodies that were created by the state and responsible as representatives of the state. I believe the boards of education need to cooperate and collaborate with all of the other town bodies with which they interact. So, for example, I think the board should have good relations with the Board of Finance, the RTM subcommittees, the RTM itself, Planning and Zoning Commission, and the like. Because I think the board, considering its fiscal dependence, needs to develop positive relationships with all of these bodies. I also believe strongly that the Board of Finance acts only in its role as the Board of Finance. Planning and Zoning Commission only acts in its role as Planning and Zoning. Individual members of those commissions, much like the Board of Education, have no authorization or authority to act on their own in the name of those bodies. So that I believe that if a request comes from the Board of Finance for certain information approved by the Board of Finance acting in public session, the board has a responsibility to address those requests. The same is true of Planning and Zoning and the RTM and the RTM subcommittees And I've noted that this board has been very, very good in doing just that and trying to be as collaborative and cooperative as possible with all of these bodies. I do not believe that an individual Board of Education member can go to the Board of Finance and say, I want to know X, Y, Z about something that the Board of Finance controls without the Board of Education authorizing that board member to act on behalf of the Board of Ed. And the same holds true with individual members of the Board of Finance or Planning and Zoning. So from my perspective, and I believe if you look at the statute, you look at legal opinions, the Board of Education has a responsibility to respond to those other organizations, other committees, commissions, acting on behalf of the town, duly authorized to do so. The board has a responsibility to answer their request for information, but I do not believe the board has any obligation to answer questions coming from an individual member of a board or commission who is not acting on behalf of the commission. On the other hand, if they come as private citizens, then we would treat their request for information as we would that of any other private citizen. But that's in a whole different context. You want my opinion? You got it.
Mr. Burke.
Well, I think that, private citizens in this town, taxpayers who fund everything that we do, have an extraordinary right to information. So I think individual board member being treated like a citizen stands in a pretty good spot. But that said, my only concern as a board member, as it relates to any work performed by an administration, is that they have the ability to do it efficiently, and recognize that their first obligation is the care and custody and control of 4,700 students during the day, and that's a very lengthy and time-consuming process. So I would just want any procedure in place that recognizes that fact, and so administration members are doing their job for the students, number one, and requests for information wherever they come from, as their time and abilities permit.
Anybody else? Mrs. Ritchie.
Well, I think there's two things we're talking about. We're talking about information that's currently in existence and everybody has access to because that's protected by FOIA. And then there's a request for information that doesn't exist in terms of creating a report or data. So I think those are also two different things. Anyone can get any information that currently exists, but I think when it comes to creating a new data or analysis, I don't think every citizen in this town has the authority to come and request that of the superintendent. So I think there's a difference. There's what exists and what people have access to in terms of information, and then what doesn't exist, and I think that's where we're sort of stuck right now.
Other board members, Mr. Deneen.
But is it as simple as a communication line that needs to be set up amongst boards, and using kind of how we're organized in terms of chair people and vice chair people, that the communication should be, if someone from another board is looking for something from the Board of Ed, then the request should come through to the chair, and the chair can determine, okay, that's public information, we can get it for you. To Mr. Burke's point, we have to make sure it doesn't take time and energy away from their day jobs, but I think we have to look at it in somewhat of a simpler way, and it's not like it happens all the time, but I agree with everything that's said here, but I think we're getting caught up in a lot of legal mumbo jumbo versus working with each other as one team in one small town.
Right.
So I think what Tom made clear is that requests for information really should go to the superintendent. The superintendent would then bring it to the board based on the request. and then the board could decide. I would agree that the scenario is incredibly specific, and I'm not sure that we need to over-legislate for it. It seems to, in some ways, taken on a life of its own. But I do think that probably the best model we have is with the RTM, and I do think we've worked hard at that relationship. They discuss their questions in public, they bring them to us, we discuss it with our administration. And Mrs. McCammon brought up the point of maybe knowing about seeing those questions, but we do hear them in public session, but then we deliver them back as a body to the RTM.
That was the point I brought up. We don't deliver them back as a body. You do. But anyway, as you were.
No, I don't. We deliver them back as a body. I happen to be the spokesperson, but if you'd like to, what I was referencing is you'd like to review those
Yes.
prior to, and so we were
Correct.
willing to make that adjustment.
Wonderful.
The concern seemed to be at the end of the meeting is that there was, what do we do when we get this request? Is there anything that anyone feels we need to do differently than what was just described? Mrs. Ritchie.
No, I mean, I think the RTM model is a good one. I think I think we should maybe take that model and apply it to everything. I think there's a process, and I think when a request comes through, it has to be specific and informative. And I think for the most part, it should go through administration. It should go to the superintendent. And if there becomes an instance where it's time-consuming and the superintendent doesn't have a clear path, then perhaps the board should opine on it. But I think there was an anomaly that happened, and it's rare. I've never seen it. I've talked to others. They never have seen it. So I think the process we had in place was working. And I think for the most part, it works. I think the superintendent should be the point person for the most part on these requests. That's my personal view.
Mr. Brown.
Just following up on a couple of points, and the point that was made back in the offsite we had here. It was a long discussion about Comity and boards working closely together, and I kind of echo what was just said. I mean, there's no reason why we should have animosity between the boards in town. There's no reason there shouldn't be a free flow of information between. I don't see why the superintendent, who as the executive delegates tasking and assignments and who's going to do what work on a day in, day out basis, can't figure out a request, whether that needs to be something that's too much or not too much, and why all of a sudden we're trying to create this artificial process of vetting and passing information when we had this working very well in a nice, respectful system for a long time. So again, I think there was a kerfuffle here, but I think that working with all the boards together would be the best way to move forward.
So I do think that I would agree with you, there's no need to be animosity between boards, and I think that's what took some of us by such surprise. We certainly have, and in our capacity, do kind of delegate work to the superintendent, and other boards in town do not order work from the superintendent. And so that's kind of what we're saying is sometimes, what are we ordering? In this particular instance, it was public information. It was not particularly time consuming. There were questions over why is the Board of Finance looking at this? This is something we've never seen before. And because it was represented from the public agency, those seem like fair questions. That doesn't mean that there's not a good working relationship, but we do oftentimes control the work that the superintendent does because that's our job. But if there's a request for public information, the superintendent can fill it, then that's fine.
I mean, to that point, we have requests going out to the police department now in relationship to, these gates and what we're having. So, I mean, our board requests from the other agencies in the town, we don't have to go through a process to authorize with the police department, hey, we'd like to see the traffic study, could we have a meeting, we'd like to do it in public, make the request. Things happen, we request information from other departments, and I don't know why it's exceptional that people request things from us. They're easy to facilitate.
Mr. Moran.
Yeah, I would echo that, Mr. Brown. And I think the other part which bothers me as well is that there has to be a formal vote. We're not taking a formal vote on things, and I don't even know that the majority should rule. What if it's 5-4 and 4 members want some information to help build a case against the 5, or there's 7, there's 4 and 3. If the 3 minority members would like some information, why shouldn't they be allowed to get that information, especially if it's very easy? And to me, I think we have to go back and just say, if members of a governmental body are looking for information, we should provide that information to them if it's readily available.
Mrs. McNamara.
I'm sorry, to clarify, so is that we're standing there that any legislative body or commission or board should go directly to the superintendent and ask for information, and at that point, it's at the discretion of the superintendent as to whether or not it comes back to the board? Is that where we are, Tara?
Well, I think that it depends. What Mr. Brown and Mr. Maroney, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to misrepresent it, are saying individual members can go to the superintendent. So in theory, 100 members of the RTM could all put in a request for the superintendent. The question would be then, how does the superintendent then prioritize that work? That has not been the way that we have operated, Mrs. Ritchie?
So I would just to add on that, obviously when you start thinking about how many elected officials we have in town, that could become a burden on, I would highly encourage the RTM, the Board of Finance, anybody that would like information to do that collectively as a group, not individually. It could become very time consuming. I know people wouldn't want to put that upon the superintendent, but I would discourage the practice of individuals coming to the superintendent with requests.
I would agree with Mrs. Ritchie, and I'd say not just the superintendent, because most requests tend to be financial in nature and will be on our finance director. And I think part of the issue we had with this particular request is it could have been asked during budget season and wasn't. And Mr. Feeney, as we all know, works very hard, and it's just a matter of understanding sort of what the boundaries are and what work, this was an easy request to fill. They may not all be so easy or so readily available. And it's a matter of sort of protecting Mr. Feeney or our finance director and letting him, to Mr. Burke's point, do his regular work.
I mean, I'll be open, and we have Board of Finance members here, and we have Mr. Zagrodzky here, so I think it's fair, since we're talking about the Board of Finance, if you feel that you want to interject, then please feel free to come up to the table. But I think the concern, and since I received it, it was my concern, was what is the Board of Finance looking at with these transfers? These transfers have all been approved as part of an audit. Is there a concern that either the Board of Finance missed something, which I happen to think they're incredibly diligent at their work, and I don't think they missed something in the audit, or is there something they think the board has missed, in which case, let's talk about the concern. I don't think that's the case. I don't know that that's the case, or if the Board of Finance has a concern with their work on the in reading the final audit. So that's where I think what's being described is maybe it's better, these are operational requests, to go to the superintendent, and if the superintendent has a concern or something, to bring it to the board and say, I've had this request from an individual member or from the Board of Finance, not an individual member. What does the board think? I think that's what Tom described. That's certainly how I feel, because I'd feel much more comfortable with the administration bringing it to the full board, so the whole board is in on that conversation. I think it's fair. I think, Mr. Brown, to your point, we really have had good working relationships, and I am steadfast in maintaining that, and I think every one of the 9 of us are, and I imagine every one of the members on the Board of Finance is too. I think this was a particularly unique situation that we're trying to solve for. But I would echo Mrs. Ritchie's statements that I think the model with the RTM has only gotten better and created a stronger dialogue around the budget. And part of the need for that collaboration is they vote on our budget and they make a decision on our budget. So they need that information so that they can make a well-informed decision for the public.
So I guess on your comments there, which I appreciate, the question I would come with is you said that there was a step of why is this information being requested? And I guess the proper question in our tasking is really how much work is there involved? Is this really something we can turn around? How much of a heavy lift is this? Or is this an easy request? I'm not sure we should have the gatekeeping function of why are you asking for this? I'm not sure that's our proper role.
I don't think that,
Mr. Burke.
I don't interpret that as a gatekeeping function at all. I mean, I interpret that as an even more collaborative effort, because you're going back to who's ever seeking the information and saying, okay, you're asking for this, we can give you that. Can you help me out with what you're actually really looking for? Because maybe I can
Transparency.
get you something even more transparent, even more direct to your question. And I think that's part of a conversation and a collaborative process. I don't interpret that as wanting to know what you're really looking for or what the information is,
No,
how
but
is it going to help you. I think that makes it easier for us or for the administration to give better and more informed information as opposed to, oh, wait a minute, this is something we don't want to give. I don't see it as being that way. at
No,
all.
I agree that you could read that situation either way, but I would argue too, why get into that situation where it can have that perception?
Mrs. Ritchie and then Mrs.
I would add on to what Mr. Burke said. I do think as part of being collaborative in town among town bods and boards and commissions, I do think, first of all, the superintendent reports to the Board of Education and no one else. So people can come from town and request information, but he's under no obligation to provide that information. That is at his discretion. But I think to work collaboratively, if there's something important and critical that needs to be provided, it should be. But I do think it should be provided with a reason and it's part of the process. And I think we should be transparent in why an information request is coming through. We're a public body, we meet in public, we all are, and I think that should be part of the process. I think it's important.
And I think FOIA doesn't demand a justification, just so we're all clear. FOIA does not
I'm
demand a
not referring to
justification.
FOIA.
And so
So it's
that's
not
kind
FOIA
of,
request.
that's really where things got a little wonky, I think, and I'll own part of that in the sense that as an individual request, any FOIA request we get automatically goes right to superintendent. As a request from an intergovernmental body, it was a little bit coax some more explanation. But that was my thinking, and that's why I think that we're improving upon the process, certainly not to exasperate any issues between boards, but trying to be clear on the process. Mrs. McNamara.
I was just going to echo Dave's comments. I do think I would get concerned if we feel we are questioning as to what the work is or why. The why. Why are we asking? I would think we would try to work as expeditiously as possible with these requests and that they again go directly to the superintendent. But I'm concerned about then the mechanism for that information coming back to the board. We have to wait for a meeting. How are we going to handle that type of inquiry if the
So-
superintendent does feel? And I also want to echo, there's other situations where, for example, Park and Rec needs to talk to the administration about their needs. It's not only financially related. There have been other scenarios where Park and Rec, for example, is looking for information from our athletic department. So I think there are a lot of scenarios that we aren't even discussing, so it's not just
So I think
financial.
if we go back just to the first part, because you had three distinct parts
Mhm.
there. What is your, and we're gonna, I feel bad that we're referencing a specific situation and yet we're trying to solve for the general, so apologies. But what is your understanding then of the Board of Finance's role with the Board of Education audit? What information did they provide to the auditors?
I was not part of the inquiry. You'd have to direct that to the Board of Finance.
Well, no, so I'm saying the Board of Education speaks directly to its auditors. Its auditors give a final report to the Board of Finance. They review it diligently. So part of the query came from the fact that there's been 2 years of approved audits.
Okay.
What's the concern? I think it's a logical question when it's Board of Finance to Board of Ed or any town body.
I guess
versus an individual coming and saying, I'd like all the transfers. And so if you make it Parks and Rec, right, if someone from the Parks and Rec Commission comes and says, I'd like to see all your data on student injuries for the year, it might be reasonable, and through this flow, going to the superintendent for the superintendent to say, is there a concern that you're noticing on our fields or something? Is there something we can do better? Are you seeing an incidence? Doesn't mean you don't provide the information.
Okay, as long as that doesn't hold it up, that the request is not tainted with perception that is unreal, that is not realistic.
I don't think anyone's argued that.
Well, I think that's kind of what we had here, so, but, in this particular scenario. But we're trying to create broader guidelines to help the communication.
Any other comments? Does anyone feel that we need to make a different move other than the current understanding that these requests are operational and will go to the superintendent first? And that's, okay, that's comfortable. Is there anyone who feels differently? In that case, we can move on. No one? Now and forever, so that we don't need to bring this up again? Okay.
So when the superintendent gets the request, what will be the next step?
The superintendent can make a determination. However, if he has concerns or thinks the board needs to be aware of something, he'll bring it to the board at the next board meeting.
Yep.
Would that be your recommendation?
Yeah,
on
I
that?
would think that getting a request, I would look at the nature of the request, the amount of time be necessary to collect the information, and make a judgment as to whether it was easy to provide information or difficult, and bring that to the board and say, here's my dilemma, and let the board help in making that decision.
Mrs. Ritchie.
Just to add on that, I would imagine most of these requests will never come to the board. Like 99.999% will never hear about the requests will be generated, and that'll be the end of it. So in that rare occasion where the superintendent is uncertain how to proceed, that's when it would come to the Board of Education.
I think Mr. Zagrodzky would like to say something, and considering we've discussed his board, I think that accommodation can be met.
Thank you for the accommodation. Howdy, friends. Hope you're well. I think this has been blown out of proportion. We are talking about a single data request that came from one of our board members, Jim Palin. It went to me first, and he asked whether he could send it in. I looked at it. It was simply a list of transfers, budget transfers, and I said, seems fine to me. It's publicly available data. In terms of the point about what the analysis was going to be used for, it was all hypothetical. We were going to have to do an analysis of that data to see if it told us anything. I'm not sure it was going to, and I don't think we've finally looked at it or even finished the analysis on that. But it was really part of our responsibility as a Board of Finance to get some financial data and take a look at it. And the nature of this particular request, because it came from Jim and then went to me and then went to Tara, I think there were some misinterpretations of all that that's then blown up into spending money on lawyers and spending a significant amount of your retreat talking about it. Now, this whole board discussion about a single data request. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I can't remember anything ever like this coming up. So in terms of, to your point, Tara, the level of animosity or kind of surprising about that, I mean, we sent in a data request and then that was kind of it. This all blew up from there into all of these proceedings, really not at our request. It got a lot more serious, I think, because the Board of Education wanted to explore this further. My own view is that this has damaged the relationship between the Board of Education and the Board of Finance. I look forward to working with you all to try and repair that, but to see a simple data request coming from the Board of Finance that ultimately has fiduciary responsibility for the town's expenditures to sort of blow up like this and have it feel like both boards now have to lawyer up every time we need to get a request done like this feels excessive. But I just want to make sure that you all know that we are simply trying to fulfill our responsibility. We recognize that this is an agency of the state and not of the town, and we treat that appropriately. And we also know that we don't have line item authority over any budgetary expenditures within your operational budget, and we totally get that. At the same time, our board needs to take a look at whatever data we need to take a look at. Unless it's protected by law, then we, like any other citizen in the town, actually has a right to that data. So I can assure you that certainly as long as I'm on this board, any type of request that we provide will be provided with whatever procedures you outline. We're going to do it judiciously. We're not going to do something that requires an inordinate amount of work. This is not a FOIA fishing expedition. We're simply trying to fulfill our responsibilities to the town and work collaboratively with all boards. Again, I said that I felt like this had damaged our working relationship. I stand by that. I also stand by the comment that I'd like to repair that and work together with you all in terms of whatever procedures you decide are important so that we can do our work, collaborating with you for you to do your work, and that we all work for the interest of the town and for the education of these students. But thank you for the time to speak.
So
and,
just a few points.
collaborating going forward.
One, let's just be clear, and it was said in the paper, and it was an inaccurate statement. The board has a retreat with their attorney every year. So this was, and we often go through board operations. And so I don't think anyone lawyered up around this particular issue, just to be clear. Secondly, we support 100% the Board of Finance fulfilling their responsibility. We look forward to seeing how these numbers helped you to do that. You have had them. We report them to you every quarter. And so we'll continue to report them to you quarterly, and maybe that will, we look forward to seeing what it does to help you, because at the moment we remain unsure. But as you go through that process. I'm sure it will be enlightening. But, you know, hopefully this has not damaged the relationship between us, because I think for the most part, we have passed strong budgets for our schools, and we will move forward from there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We will move on to our added agenda item, possible revisions to the educational specifications for the Oxford School Building Project. Dr. Landon and Mr. Deneen.
There are, you want me to go? I'll do it. There are two proposals that are significant, but which we believe are beneficial. The first of these is to build a middle school-sized gymnasium in the new Oxford Middle School that would be available for community use as well as school use. The advantage of the size, which is more than double the size of the original common room, is that that gymnasium facility can be divided. And so it can be used as a common room, and of course it can be used as a gymnasium, and in the evenings and weekends it can be used as a community facility. So we don't lose the common room, we get a bigger gym, and that's a positive. The other change has to do with, and Duke, you help me if I'm missing anything, is in security, in that originally security was going to be placed inside the main office, but there were very strong feelings administratively that that's not appropriate, and it was on the part of the employees as well. They didn't want strangers coming into the office without ID and so on. So we're going to continue with the same approach of man trap. There's also going to be a larger entryway. Our class sizes of 900 square feet and 1,000 with a 60 square foot for the bathrooms for ELP remains. Two of the classes for ELP can be converted into kindergartens. It's also a positive. We have included in the ed specs now a second psychologist room in every one in that school to match the fact that we now have 2 in every school. Our office spaces have been adjusted to meet the needs. So overall, we think it's a better design.
Thank you, Dr. Landon. I think it's positive. At the end of the day, what we're coming to you for is all the ed specs are being met. If they're not being met, we have to come to the board. The one ed spec that is changing is the proposal to eliminate the common room, which is 1,500 square feet. But we're taking that square footage and putting it into the gymnasium and creating a larger gymnasium that can be divided, used as a gymnasium, used as a stage, used as a common room. The original ed specs had a common room for 1,500 square feet, trying to accommodate 500 people. Based on the net square footage for an individual person, in terms of fire code and just regular guidelines, you'd only be able to fit about 90 people in a 1,500 square foot room. So hence the recommendation from the architects to really increase the size of the gymnasium. It's something that's viewed in a better light from a state perspective also. The other adjustments are all net positive. There's about 4,000 square feet we've added based on architectural recommendations to the nursing rooms, to the individual therapy rooms and different things like that they thought were a little on the small side. So it's all a net positive.
So what's before the board right now is that there is an ed spec change, and the change is the language in the ed spec says that there will be a common room of 1,500 square feet. And while functionally that space will exist, that ed spec needs to change because it's now being put into the gymnasium. It's not its own separate room. Mrs. Ritchie.
I just wanted to clarify, so there will be a divider, so the room could be used
Yes.
simultaneously for different things?
Sure.
It'll be a movable divider.
Right.
So it can be open to a large space, or it can be into 2 single spaces, small.
Okay, Mrs. McNamara.
I'm sorry, Duke, could you just clarify again why the added 1,000 feet from the common to the gym? Like you're taking 1,500 off and adding 25?
We're eliminating the common room, which is 1,500 square feet, but we're actually adding 2,500 square feet to the gymnasium.
So why the difference in the 1,000? Why aren't you just adding 15?
Just to get to a junior high size basketball, full basketball court.
Okay.
So it's like Tokenique.
Correct.
Okay.
No, bigger than Tokenique.
But bigger.
Tokenique's too small. And Tokenique has
But
the stage,
configuration-wise.
Tokenique has the stage in the middle.
Uh-huh.
This will have the stage at
So
the
you
end.
can
so you'll have the
simultaneously
full
use it
use.
for different functions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other board questions?
Yeah.
Mr. Brown?
The community usage you mentioned, would we not have been able to offer community usage in the original plan?
No.
Okay,
The
so
school-
this
the
is, this will
schools-
be different then?
The school's available for community usage if they go through the school. That doesn't change.
Okay,
This is just a bigger facility.
understood, thank you.
Excuse my, I guess I have two questions. One is, did we have two common rooms, one for ELP and one for the general ed, or did we
Yeah.
just have one common room?
We have two.
Okay, so there's, the ELP common room still remains?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
And then my second question is, and maybe this is cart before the horse, but the addition of 1,000 square feet and adding more space, will that be difficult for you to build on, whereas the additional square footage, will that hinder you to build on the plot of land that we have available?
That's what we're working through right now. As of right now, no.
Okay.
And so not, unless they change the ed specs.
No, but
not
I mean,
our
it's
area.
cart before the horse kind of
Yeah.
thing, so.
No, all that we are working on, we have our second design review meeting this week. All that we're working on is what actually fits and where it should fit on that site for the best use
I don't
of the
want to
site.
tie your hands saying this is what we
Yep.
don't want, and then now you say you
No.
can't do it because it's too small, so.
This is just preliminary to get the grant application in. The goal too is to deliver, in some ways, the most square footage that we need, knowing the state may push back on some things.
Okay.
So may I have a motion to change the educational specifications as noted in the memo from 6/25/19? Mr. Burke and Mr. Maroney, all in favor? And that is unanimous.
This
We
is
will-
going to be one heck of a great building.
Great. We will move on to the PAR dated 6/25/19. Mrs. Sion, anything? Or
Nothing
just
new.
a request approval? So may I have a motion to approve the PAR dated 6/25/19? Mr. Burke, a second please. Mr. Brown, all in favor? And that is unanimous. With that, any public comment this evening? What?
We have to approve the contract.
Contracts.
Oh, sorry, skipped over contracts, the most important part.
Right, we do them separately, Marge?
I mean, they're very similar because they're represented by the
That's right,
same
we
person,
gotta
but
do them
yeah.
separately. May I have you want me to do this one? May I have a motion to approve the contract agreement between the Darien Board of Education and the Darien School Maintenance Association? Mr. Brown, Mr. Burke, any conversation? All in favor? That is unanimous. May I have a motion to approve the contract agreement between the Darien Board of Education and the Darien School Custodians Union? Mr. Deneen and Mr. Maroney. Any conversation? All in favor? That is unanimous. They would have been upset if I missed those.
Relax.
Any public comment this evening? Please state your name and address.
Stacy TA, 10 Clocks Lane. I just wanted to add, when you guys discuss the gates, if you could also discuss summer school and ESY. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment this evening? May I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Ritchie and Mr. Maroney, all in favor? And that is unanimous. We are adjourned.